On the 31st of May 2007, in Walton-on-Thames, Surrey, in the United Kingdom, a woman was reported missing. Kate Beagley hadn't turned up to work, and nobody had heard anything from her. Her father knew she had been out the night before, so he decided to head over to her home to check if everything was okay. But when he arrived, she wasn't there. She had also failed to turn up for an appointment. This was not like Kate at all, and her father knew this, so he reported her as a missing person to the police. It wasn't just the police who were out searching. Kate's friends were conducting searches themselves and putting up missing persons posters all around the area, hoping that someone would know something. Facebook was still very much in its infancy at this time, but they set up a group there to keep people updated and share any information. 32-year-old Kate Beagley was described as a special and loyal person, always happy and smiling. She was someone you could count on in a time of need. She worked for a FTSE 100 company, and her incredible work ethic had led to her getting a senior role as a national compliance manager with the gas firm Centrica. She had a massive group of friends, loved to travel, and had a real sense of adventure. She was also diligent and would never just disappear without telling people where she was going. Although this was a quiet place where not a lot happened, certainly not a lot of crime, the backdrop the police were working against was another infamous murder, the abduction and killing of Millie Dowler. Millie Dowler was a 13-year-old schoolgirl who had been abducted in Walton-on-Thames in March of 2002. Her remains were found several months later. Her murder gripped the public and was front-page news across the country as the hunt for her killer went on over the years. It would be years until he was finally caught. On the 23rd of June, 2011, Levi Belfield was found guilty of abducting and murdering Millie Dowler. He was given another whole life sentence, life with no possibility of parole. But at the time Kate was missing, Millie's killer had still not yet been caught, so the police needed to reassure the public and get the answers that so many were looking for. Then something happened that caused a lot of concern. Kate's friends had been receiving text messages from her phone, but they didn't sound like her. Everybody, when they use text messages, has a pattern of speech and a pattern of typing that is unique to them. These messages from Kate's phone did not fit with that pattern and used words and phrases that she wouldn't have used. When the police carried out a search of her home, they found a second phone. Investigators from the Missing Persons Unit looked at the phone in more detail and decided to get in touch with some of the numbers on there, one of which belonged to a man she had gone out with for a date the day before she was reported missing. Her friends didn't know much about him, apart from the fact his name was Carl. The pair had met at a club in central London a few weeks before. Maybe she had gone back to his? Not likely, her family said. So, who was this Carl? His name was Carl Taylor. He had lived in a one-bedroom flat in Covent Garden for around 8 years. And he did have a criminal record, but nothing that raised alarm bells. In 2002, he had been convicted of obtaining property by deception. That same year, he had made an attempt to end his life by jumping off a bridge but was talked down. His mother had begged him to get help, and he was spoken to by psychiatrists. On the phone found at her house, texts between the pair were discovered where they had agreed to meet up. The first few hours of a person being reported missing are absolutely vital for gathering evidence, and the police had nothing to lose and everything to gain, so they decided to ring his number. Surprisingly, he answered. He said he had been the person she had met with, and she had dropped him off at Twickenham. He had got onto a bus to head home, and he hadn't seen her since. But this story just didn't make any sense. They spoke to his mother, and she said that in the early hours of the morning of May 31st, the day she was reported missing, he had arrived in a new car, a Volkswagen Golf that she didn't recognize. He was also cleaning it. His explanation? He had got it from a woman, and she needed it cleaned to take her children to school. But this was a lie. It was Kate's Volkswagen Golf, and now she was missing. If she had dropped him off and he hadn't seen her again, why on earth would he have her vehicle? And if there was a totally innocent explanation, why would he not have offered this information straight away when the police told him what was going on? The investigation into Kate's disappearance also revealed that her Volkswagen was not the only thing belonging to her in his possession. He had also given his mother some shopping vouchers out of the blue at 5:45 that morning, but they weren't his. They had come from Kate's glove box. He also sold what turned out to be Kate's phone to one of his friends. He was even bragging about his new car. Further inquiries found that her car had been seen just before midnight on the 30th, as it was driven over Chiswick Bridge in the opposite direction of where Kate lived. The driving was described as erratic, and a police officer had spotted it and logged a check with the police national computer. With each passing hour, it wasn't looking good. It was becoming more obvious that Kate had likely come to serious harm. 27-year-old Carl Taylor had trained in martial arts and worked as a football coach and fitness instructor. He was very physically fit and strong. Overpowering Kate would have been easy. The police decided they needed to bring him in for an interview. If this was just one big misunderstanding, and he had nothing to do with what had happened to Kate, then this was his chance to explain. But there was one problem. The man who had been quick to answer the phone that morning was now silent and not responding to anything. When the police call, it usually shows as no caller ID as the number is withheld. So it's likely that he knew who was trying to get in touch with him, so the officers decided to try something different, ringing off a personal phone, and sure enough, Carl answered. He told the same story, but was not forthcoming with details. He was told that 2 officers would be traveling up to London to take a statement, as the answers he was providing on the phone were not good enough, and they certainly did not put their minds at ease. He then asked if it would be possible for them to meet him at a party he was due to be going to, that night at a flat in Holland Park. It was certainly odd. A girl he had just gone on a date with had vanished. He was driving around in her car without a proper explanation, and he was carrying on like normal, like nothing had happened. The officers arrived and took him to a separate room to talk. Speaking to him in person did nothing to quell their fears. He was still evasive, vague, and not really answering their questions. More folks began to arrive at the party, and the alcohol started flowing. Not exactly an ideal location for a police interview. Carl's demeanor also started to change. He became visibly irritable and more annoyed, and the officers were becoming concerned for their safety and well-being. The decision was made to take him into custody and drive him back to Walton-on-Thames. But there were still concerns for the officers' safety, so officers from the Metropolitan Police Force were drafted in as backups should they be needed. As they waited for them to arrive, the detective sergeant on scene created an excuse to get Carl out of the flat and downstairs to their car outside. Carl, none the wiser, went downstairs and got into their car. He was subsequently arrested on suspicion of kidnapping Kate Beagley. He was driven back to Walton and placed in a cell, and the case was given over to the major crime team, with Detective Chief Inspector Mark Preston in charge. They needed to speak to him, and urgently, if they were going to stand any chance of finding Kate. But his story didn't change. With still no sign of or word from Kate, the decision was made to rearrest Carl Taylor, this time on suspicion of her murder. He was interviewed again, and this time he just refused to talk. No comment was the answer he gave to every single question. The police got a court order to extend his detention and get more time to question him, but he still gave no comment. He wouldn't explain why he had her car or why he had been seen on CCTV footage at a garage topping up the petrol. Bizarrely, he only put in £1 worth of petrol. All of this evidence was painting a dark, albeit circumstantial picture. They needed something more concrete, and they needed him to talk. So he was taken back to his cell to think on all of the evidence that had been presented. On Sunday night, he was allowed to have another phone call with his mother, and the decision was made to conduct another interview with him. Detective Chief Inspector Preston had been awake for more than 24 hours at this point, and decided to go home to try and rest. As soon as his head hit the pillow, his phone rang. It was the station. Carl Taylor had confessed. Not only had he confessed to murder, but he was going to take them to where her body was. His story was as callous as it was horrifying. He had wanted her car and launched his attack to try and get it. She had fought back, so he repeatedly stabbed her. He told the police, "She pushed me away. She was grabbing me and I stabbed her in the throat. I constantly and consistently cut her in the neck because she was going for my face." But for the officers, this story didn't make much sense. He was physically much stronger than her and had training in martial arts, so why did he feel the need to use a weapon against somebody that he could have overpowered anyway? The officers weren't buying it. He said he had taken her body out to near Watford in Hertfordshire, so the police got in touch with Hertfordshire police to ask them for their assistance. When they took him there, this was a huge operation. They needed to make sure he was filmed and recorded the entire way down so as not to miss any evidence, as he was still in caution, and they needed to make sure that they could not only keep everybody else safe, but also prevent him from escaping. It was now well into the night as they began their journey to Watford, with Carl giving them directions as they went. But was this going to be another red herring? He directed them to a car park of a local nature reserve called Oxhey Woods. It was dark and eerily quiet. You could barely see your hand in front of your face. Carl got out and directed the officers to a load of stinging nettles. An officer went round the back, avoiding taking any obvious route that a killer might have taken. And with that, the missing persons case was over. At 3 a.m. that morning, Kate's naked body was found. The area was immediately cordoned off, and crime scene examiners started the painstaking task of retrieving and collecting evidence. A statement released on behalf of Kate's family, her parents Alan and Claire, and her brother Guy, said, Kate was a loving, thoughtful, dependable, loyal, and tremendously popular daughter, sister, granddaughter, godmother, and friend who was devoted to her family and friends. Kate will be missed by everyone that knew her every day and in every way. Flowers were left at the crime scene, with many deeply affected. One message read, I never met you, but I feel like I have known you for a lifetime. My heart goes out to all those who were blessed with your love and friendship. The place is a sorer place without you. Kate was so badly injured, and the hot weather had already started decomposition, which meant she could not be initially formally identified. She needed to be identified using DNA. Her clothes had been removed, and her body had been washed. Carl said he had wanted to spiritually clean her and leave her open to the stars. Apart from her body, nothing else was found despite the fingertip searches. They couldn't locate the murder weapon or any of Kate's belongings. It was later revealed that Carl Taylor had thrown the knife out of her car as he drove it down the motorway after dumping her body. Amazingly, the officers were able to find the murder weapon alongside some of her clothes. She always kept bottles of water in her car. These were also found, and some of these had been used to wash her body. Her blood was also found on the knife. The police needed to trace her car, as that could be a hub of vital evidence, and Carl offered to tell them where it was. He said it was on an estate in Hounslow, London, and sure enough, it was. The post-mortem would reveal the horrifying catalog of injuries that Kate had suffered. She had more than 30 stab wounds to her neck, face, and head. This news was utterly devastating for Kate's loved ones. Understandably, the grief was extremely difficult to navigate, trying to process the emotions of losing a friend and loved one, whilst also having so many unanswered questions as to the violent nature of her death. But what had actually happened that night? The man who had previously offered no comment now agreed to take the police to the pub in Richmond Hill, where he and Kate had had their first date. On the other side of the road, there was an embankment overlooking the Thames with several benches dotted around. Carl said it was on one of these benches that he had attacked her. There was blood on the ground, on the steps, and on the handrails leading back towards the pub. The blood was tested, and tragically, it was Kate's. With all of the evidence in front of them, the decision was made to charge Carl Taylor with the murder of Kate Beagley. In spite of his confession and the evidence, he entered a plea of not guilty to the charge. He was now saying that he had acted in self-defense and that Kate had actually taken her own life. To make their case even stronger, the police decided to go back to the nature reserve where her body was found to see if it held any more clues. Believing that this had been a sexually motivated murder, the police bagged up more than 100 used condoms that were found in that area, and every single one was tested, but none of them contained either Carl's or Kate's DNA. It would later be reported that, whilst in prison, Carl had befriended none other than Levi Belfield, the man who had killed Millie Dowler, although, at this point, it wasn't known. He had also befriended Mark Dixie, whose crime was covered on an episode of Underworld Exposé about the murder of Sally Ann Bowman. According to Laura Richards, the previous head of Scotland Yard's Homicide Prevention Unit, they would coach each other for their upcoming trials to try and play the system. She described how Levi Belfield and Mark Dixie developed a bizarre relationship after being put into adjoining cells at Belmarsh Prison. They later added Carl to their group and started burdening prison psychologists with their tactics. She said the three of them would stand trial within weeks of each other at the Old Bailey Courthouse in London, a historic building that has witnessed some of the most infamous and extraordinary trials in British criminal history. And it was now Carl Taylor's turn. The public gallery was packed out with people wanting to see justice served. Carl was still saying he was not guilty. The prosecution reiterated that Carl had previously confessed to killing Kate, and the evidence backed this up too. The jury was told that Carl and Kate had met on the 18th of May at the CC Club in Piccadilly in central London, and they had agreed to go on a proper date in a couple of weeks. They decided on the pub in Richmond Hill. During the date, she appeared to be ignoring him and not paying him any attention, with a witness saying to the police, as soon as they sat down, the girl had her head down, texting on her mobile phone. There was no conversation, only him talking to her. She continued texting. She was still texting when they left. They headed out to the bench on the embankment. He had come with a pair of scissors and a carving knife concealed up his sleeve. Carl Taylor would testify in his own defense and said that Kate was a kind and nice woman but was struggling, and she had the intention of ending her own life. He said that he had done everything he could to try and stop her, but her injuries were so grave that there was no way she could have inflicted them upon herself without falling over and losing consciousness. The prosecution rolled up a piece of paper to mimic a knife and handed it to Carl. They told him to demonstrate for the judge, jury, and court exactly how Kate had stabbed herself in the face, head, and neck more than 30 times. He refused. The judge, Jarrett Forrester, told him he was not in charge. He needed to do as he was told. His attempt to show how Kate had allegedly stabbed herself was described as ridiculous and embarrassing. He told the court, "She was prodding herself in the neck area and at the same time was pulling her hair so her head was moving around. I didn't know what to do. I just stood there in awe. I realized she passed away. I was crying profusely. I lay on the grass and looked at the sky." He then dragged her body to her car. When he had been filmed on CCTV pulling into the petrol station and buying £1 worth of petrol, Kate's body was in the boot. During the trial, it would also emerge that Carl had actually written a letter to Kate's family from his cell at Staines Police Station. "My name is Carl. I am the guy that met your daughter on Friday night. To be honest, my first impression of her was she is a kind but unhappy girl to some respect. Anyway, for the short time I met your daughter, I began to see she was an angel, but in the dark. Even though Katie is not with us, she still shines brightly as a star in the night sky. I might have took your daughter's life, but we all know, some of us more than others, that her heart still beats in the good we all do, and her soul lives on with all the good memories of her. My life has, many years ago, not been with me from significant events destroying my heart, but your lives. And in with much respect, Katie will not be a memory, but a certainly real happiness that angels do live on earth, but sometimes have to go to heaven. We live in a world where life is hard for all, and those who try and embrace the good nature get rejected. Without any doubt, what I did was wrong, but ask yourself this: whose life have I really taken? I don't expect by writing you this that I will soften your pain, but as birds sing and flowers grow in spring, remember Katie and let the love you have and always had for her and always will be like the drum beats in your heart when she first opened her eyes. Whenever you miss her, think of a star, and I promise you, just like I saw myself, she will be shining, and that's in your hearts forever. Remember, you have not lost her since she has not lost you. Sometimes you don't have to touch a flower to make it grow." The detectives who had intercepted the letter had decided not to show it to Kate's family. Less than 2 hours after retiring to consider their verdict, the jury had reached one. Carl Taylor was guilty. The public gallery erupted into cheers as it was announced. He was given a sentence of life in prison with a minimum term of 30 years to serve. The judge told him, "I am satisfied that this was a murder done for gain. You went to meet this girl equipped with a knife. She was doing no more than looking to you for friendship. You took advantage of the vulnerability of that girl for your own ends." Carl interrupted him, saying, "I didn't, Your Honor," but Judge Forrester continued, "Your use of the knife was premeditated and it was concealed on your person. Then, having carried out this foul deed, you took her away and callously concealed the body." He also called Carl arrogant, manipulative, and highly dangerous. Today, flowers mark the spot close to where she died. One message reads, "We miss you, Kate, and wish you were still this side of the rainbow." Following the conviction, Kate's father spoke outside court. "I speak for us all when I say our lives will never be the same again. Our family has been devastated, and life seems empty and meaningless without Kate." Now that the case was over, 7 detectives from Surrey Police and a Metropolitan Police analyst were commended for their tireless work. Deputy Chief Constable Craig Denholm said, "This challenging inquiry involved 3 force areas and multiple scenes. To secure a conviction whereby the offender received life imprisonment with a minimum tariff to serve of 30 years was a testament to the officers' excellent teamwork. The violence that Kate endured during her last few moments is the stuff, frankly, of nightmares. And knowing how he had so coldly disposed of her body just makes it worse. Although he received life with a minimum term of 30 years, Kate's loved ones are serving a life sentence, one that they will never be free from. As Kate's father, Alan, said, "I still feel empty and cold, and I will never lose that feeling." Kate was so vibrant and full of life. What must it have felt like during those last seconds as she was savagely struck down? The sheer terror and confusion. The impact of this cruel and savage attack has changed the lives of so many forever. My wife can't find comfort in anything. She sees nothing but emptiness for the rest of her life.